I'll never forget the metallic smell that rose from the coffee cup my husband poured for me that Sunday morning. It was a scent that would haunt me for months to come, a warning my body recognized even when my mind refused to believe what was happening. My name is Margaret, and I'm 32 years old. Well, I was 32 when this story began. Looking back now, sitting in the safety of my new home in Denver, Colorado, I can hardly believe that the man I shared a bed with for 5 years, the man who promised to love and protect me, was slowly poisoning me to help his sister steal my career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from that moment in the emergency room when everything finally clicked into place. It was a Tuesday evening in March when I found myself staring at the sterile white ceiling of Denver General Hospital, my stomach cramping so violently that I could barely speak. The doctor, a kind woman in her 50s with gentle eyes, was asking me the same questions I'd heard before. When did the symptoms start? What did you eat? Any known allergies? As I lay there, fighting waves of nausea, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just bad luck or a coincidence. This was the 4th time in 8 months that I'd ended up in a hospital bed, and each time it had happened after spending time with my husband Michael and his sister Sarah. Mrs. Patterson, the doctor said softly, pulling up a chair beside my bed. I've reviewed your previous hospital visits, and I'm seeing a concerning pattern. Have you considered that someone might be deliberately making you sick? The words hit me like a physical blow. Deliberately? The thought had crossed my mind in my darkest moments, but I'd always pushed it away. These were the people I loved most in the world. Michael, my husband of 5 years, with his warm smile and gentle hands that had held me through my father's funeral. Sarah, his older sister, who had welcomed me into their family with open arms and helped plan our wedding. But as I lay there in that hospital bed, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was solving began to fall into place. Let me tell you about the life I thought I had. Michael and I met at a charity gala in downtown Denver 6 years ago. I was 26, fresh out of business school, and working as a junior marketing associate at Coleman & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious advertising firms. He was 29, a software engineer with kind eyes and a laugh that made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. Our courtship was like something out of a romance novel. Weekend hikes in the Rocky Mountains, quiet dinners at cozy restaurants in Lodo, long conversations about our dreams and fears. When he proposed on Christmas Eve, kneeling in the snow outside the Brown Palace Hotel while holiday lights twinkled around us, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Sarah seemed thrilled about our engagement. She was 33 then, unmarried, and working as a senior marketing manager at a competing firm called Blackstone Marketing Group. She immediately took me under her wing, helping me choose flowers for the wedding, offering advice about everything from the venue to the menu. Looking back, I realize now that she was gathering information, learning about my tastes, my habits, my routines. Our wedding was perfect, a beautiful ceremony at the Denver Botanic Gardens, followed by a reception at the historic Molly Brown house. Sarah gave a touching maid of honor speech about how happy she was to finally have a sister. I remember tearing up as she spoke about family bonds and loyalty. If only I had known how twisted her version of loyalty would become. The first few years of our marriage were genuinely happy. Michael was supportive of my career ambitions, even when it meant long hours and business trips. I was climbing the ladder at Coleman & Associates, landing bigger clients and earning recognition for my innovative campaigns. By my 3rd year, I was promoted to senior account executive, managing some of the firm's most lucrative accounts. That's when things started to change, though so subtly that I didn't notice at first. Sarah had always been competitive. It was something Michael mentioned early in our relationship with a fond smile. She's driven, he'd say. Always has been since we were kids. She hates to lose at anything. I found it endearing then, this sisterly rivalry over board games and who could cook the better Thanksgiving turkey. But as my career flourished, I began to see a different side of Sarah's competitive nature. It started with small comments during family dinners. "Oh, Margaret landed another big client," she'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Must be nice to work with such established brands. At Blackstone, we have to really fight for every account. Or, I heard the Henderson account is worth $2 million. Good for you, sweetie. I remember when I was working on accounts that size. Michael would usually change the subject when these conversations started, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd fidget with his wedding ring. At the time, I thought he was just uncomfortable with workplace talk. Now I understand he was uncomfortable with something else entirely. The first incident happened 8 months ago, during what should have been a celebratory family dinner. I had just secured the largest contract of my career, a multi-million-dollar campaign for a national restaurant chain. Michael suggested we celebrate at Sarah's house, since she'd been wanting to show off her new kitchen renovation. I remember being excited to share my good news, to celebrate with the people I loved most. Sarah made my favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and opened a bottle of expensive wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. To Margaret, she toasted, raising her glass with what seemed like genuine warmth, and to all the success you deserve. We ate and laughed and shared stories. Sarah seemed genuinely happy for me, asking detailed questions about the campaign and praising my strategic approach. I felt so loved, so supported by my new family. Then, about an hour after dinner, the cramping started. At first, I thought it was just overindulgence. The salmon had been rich, and I'd had 2 glasses of wine, but the pain intensified quickly, radiating from my stomach through my entire abdomen. Within minutes, I was doubled over, struggling to breathe. Food poisoning, Michael said immediately, his face creased with concern. Must have been something she ate earlier. You know how sensitive her stomach is. Sarah was all sympathy and action, bringing me water, suggesting we call a doctor, insisting that Michael take me to the emergency room immediately. She seemed as shocked and worried as he was. The emergency room doctor found nothing conclusive. My blood work was slightly abnormal, but not in any way that pointed to a specific cause. Probably just a stomach bug, she said. These things happen. Rest, stay hydrated, and you should feel better in a day or 2. I did feel better, eventually, but the incident stuck with me, nagging at the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. Not because I suspected anything sinister. That wouldn't come until much later, but because it had happened at such a crucial time. I'd been planning to use the celebration dinner to discuss my promotion strategy with Michael, to get his input on whether I should push for a partnership track at the firm. Instead, I spent the next 3 days in bed, weak and exhausted, while my momentum from the big contract win slowly faded. As I lay in that hospital bed months later, I realized that the timing hadn't been coincidental at all. But that first incident was just the beginning. Over the next few months, there would be 2 more mysterious illnesses, each one perfectly timed to derail important moments in my career. And each time, Sarah and Michael would be there with their concern and their explanations and their helpful suggestions about taking better care of myself. The doctor was still waiting for my answer about whether I thought someone might be deliberately harming me. I looked at her kind face, thought about the pattern she'd identified, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. I think, I said slowly, that I need to tell you about my husband and his sister. What I didn't know then was that uncovering the truth would require me to become someone I'd never been before, suspicious, calculating, brave in ways I'd never had to be. I would have to question everything I thought I knew about love and family and trust. And I would have to make choices that would either save my life or destroy it completely. But that Tuesday evening in the emergency room was just the beginning. The real story, the one that would change everything, was still to come. Now, let me take you back to where it all really began, 8 months before that revelation in the emergency room. I need you to understand how carefully orchestrated this whole nightmare was, how every detail was planned to look like coincidence or bad luck. The first time it happened was during Thanksgiving. November in Denver can be unpredictable. But that year, we had one of those perfect autumn days. Crisp air, golden leaves, still clinging to the trees, the kind of weather that makes you grateful to be alive. I was especially grateful that year because I had so much to celebrate. Just 2 weeks earlier, I'd closed the biggest deal of my career. The Henderson Group, a luxury automotive dealership, had chosen Coleman & Associates to handle their complete rebranding campaign. It was a 3-year contract worth $2.8 million, and they'd specifically requested me as the lead account executive. I remember the moment my boss, Patricia Coleman, called me into her office to give me the news. She was a woman in her 60s, someone who'd built her agency from nothing in the 1980s when the advertising world was still very much a boys' club. She didn't give praise lightly. "Margaret," she said, leaning back in her leather chair with a rare smile, "in 35 years of business, I've rarely seen a presentation as compelling as what you delivered to Henderson. They didn't just choose our agency, they chose you. This is the kind of work that makes careers." I floated home that evening, practically vibrating with excitement. When I told Michael the news, he swept me up in his arms and spun me around our living room, both of us laughing like teenagers. "We have to celebrate," he said, setting me down and cupping my face in his hands. "This is huge, Maggie. You've worked so hard for this." That's when he suggested having Thanksgiving dinner at Sarah's house. She'd been wanting to host a family gathering, he said, and what better occasion than celebrating my success? I should have been suspicious of how quickly Sarah agreed to the plan. When Michael called her that same evening, she was immediately enthusiastic about hosting a celebration dinner. "Of course," I could hear her saying through the phone. "I'll make all of Margaret's favorites. This calls for something really special." Looking back, I realize now that she'd been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. The week leading up to Thanksgiving, Sarah called me almost daily with questions about the menu. What kind of wine did I prefer with salmon? Did I like my vegetables roasted or steamed? Would I prefer dinner rolls or cornbread? At the time, I was touched by her attention to detail. She was going to so much trouble to make the evening perfect for me. "You're so sweet to do all this," I told her during one of those calls. "You don't have to go overboard." "Nonsense," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It's not every day my sister-in-law lands such a huge account. I want everything to be absolutely perfect." Perfect. That word should have been a red flag. Sarah lived in a beautiful Tudor-style home in the Cherry Creek area, about 20 minutes from our place in Capitol Hill. She'd bought it 3 years earlier with money from a successful campaign she'd run for a local tech startup. The house was her pride and joy: hardwood floors, exposed beams, a gourmet kitchen that looked like something out of a magazine. When we arrived that Thanksgiving evening, the house smelled like heaven. Sarah had really outdone herself. Herb-crusted salmon, wild rice pilaf, roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon, fresh dinner rolls, and a pumpkin cheesecake that looked professionally made. "This is incredible," I said, giving her a hug as she greeted us at the door. "You've been cooking all day, haven't you?" "It was my pleasure," she said, squeezing me tight. "Today is all about you, sweetie." "You deserve to be celebrated." Michael brought flowers and a bottle of champagne. Sarah had already opened a bottle of wine, a Pinot Grigio that she said would pair perfectly with the salmon. She poured generous glasses for all of us as we settled in her dining room. The conversation over dinner was wonderful. Sarah asked detailed questions about the Henderson campaign, seeming genuinely fascinated by my strategic approach. She praised my creativity, my persistence, my ability to read what clients really wanted. "I have to admit," she said, raising her wine glass, "I'm a little jealous. In a good way, of course. The kind of jealous that makes you want to up your own game." "You've set the bar pretty high, Margaret." I felt so warm, so loved. This was what family was supposed to feel like, celebrating each other's successes, supporting each other's dreams. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with pride. "To my brilliant wife," he said, "and to all the success that's still coming her way." We clinked glasses, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The salmon was delicious, perfectly seasoned and cooked to flaky perfection. Sarah had really outdone herself. I complimented her cooking several times during the meal, and she beamed with pleasure. "I tried a new herb blend," she said. "Something I picked up at that gourmet spice shop downtown. I thought it might add an interesting complexity to the flavor." About an hour after we finished eating, while we were lingering over coffee and cheesecake, I started to feel strange. At first, it was just a slight queasiness, the kind you might get from eating too much rich food. But it escalated quickly. Within minutes, sharp cramps were shooting through my abdomen. My vision began to blur slightly, and I felt waves of dizziness washing over me. "I don't feel well," I managed to say, gripping the edge of the table. Michael was beside me instantly, his face creased with concern. "What's wrong? What are you feeling?" "Stomach pain," I gasped as another cramp hit. "Really bad. And I'm dizzy." Sarah jumped up from her chair, immediately switching into caretaker mode. "Oh, honey, you must have eaten something that didn't agree with you." "Michael, help her to the couch. I'll get some water and antacids." The pain intensified rapidly. Within 15 minutes, I was doubled over, struggling to breathe through the cramps. My skin felt clammy, and I was alternating between feeling feverish and cold. "We need to get her to a hospital," Michael said, his voice tight with worry. Sarah agreed immediately. "Of course, I'll follow in my car in case you need anything." The emergency room at Presbyterian, St. Joseph Hospital, was busy that Thanksgiving evening, but they took me back fairly quickly when they saw how much pain I was in. The doctor, a tired-looking man in his 40s, ran blood tests and asked detailed questions about what I'd eaten. "Could be food poisoning," he said after reviewing my results. "Your white blood cell count is slightly elevated, which suggests your body is fighting something, but it could also be a stomach virus." These things are hard to pin down sometimes. Michael held my hand while we waited for the anti-nausea medication to take effect. Sarah paced the small examination room, wringing her hands with worry. "I feel terrible," she kept saying. "Could it have been something with dinner? But we all ate the same thing, and Michael and I feel fine." "Don't blame yourself," I told her weakly. "These things happen. Maybe I'm just more sensitive to something." "Still," she said, "I'll throw away all the leftovers just in case. I couldn't live with myself if I made you sick." I spent the next 3 days in bed, weak and exhausted. The timing couldn't have been worse. I'd been planning to use the weekend to work on some preliminary ideas for the Henderson campaign. Instead, I lost 3 crucial days of preparation time. When I finally returned to work the following Monday, I felt behind and scattered. The energy and momentum from landing the big contract had dissipated, replaced by lingering fatigue and self-doubt. "You look tired," Patricia observed when she stopped by my office. "Are you sure you're feeling well enough to be back?" "I'm fine," I insisted. But I wasn't really. The illness had taken more out of me than I'd expected. Over the next few weeks, I struggled to regain my focus. The Henderson campaign was going well, but I felt like I was constantly playing catch-up, never quite hitting the stride I'd been in before Thanksgiving. At the time, I chalked it up to the natural aftermath of being sick. Bodies need time to recover, right? It wasn't until months later that I would realize how perfectly timed that illness had been, right when I was at the peak of my confidence and momentum. The second incident happened in January, just as I was hitting my stride again with the Henderson campaign. I'd recovered fully from the Thanksgiving illness and was feeling strong and focused. The preliminary campaign materials I'd developed were getting rave reviews from the client, and Patricia was already hinting about a possible promotion. That's when Sarah suggested we have a girls' afternoon, lunch and shopping followed by tea at the Brown Palace Hotel. "You've been working so hard," she said when she called to propose the plan. "We hardly see each other anymore except for family dinners. I miss spending time with just you." I was touched by the invitation. Sarah was 8 years older than me, and sometimes I felt like she saw me more as her little brother's wife than as a friend in my own right. This felt like an opportunity to deepen our relationship. We met at her favorite restaurant in Cherry Creek, a trendy place called Seasons that served innovative American cuisine. Sarah was in a great mood, asking about my work and sharing funny stories about her own clients at Blackstone Marketing. "I have to tell you," she said over our salads, "I've been watching your career with such admiration. The way you landed Henderson, the creativity in your campaigns, you're really making a name for yourself." "Thank you," I said, feeling a warm glow of sisterly affection. "That means a lot coming from you. You've been in this business longer than I have." "Experience isn't everything," she replied. "Sometimes fresh perspective and natural talent matter more. You have both." After lunch, we wandered through the boutiques in Cherry Creek Mall. Sarah helped me pick out a new dress for an upcoming client presentation, a beautiful navy blue sheath that made me feel professional and confident. "Perfect," she said, nodding approvingly as I modeled it in the fitting room. "You're going to knock them dead in that." Around 3 o'clock, we made our way to the Brown Palace Hotel for afternoon tea. The Palace Arms Tea Court was elegant and refined, exactly the kind of place where successful women could relax and enjoy each other's company. Sarah ordered for both of us Earl Grey tea with an assortment of finger sandwiches and pastries. "My treat," she insisted when I reached for my wallet. "Consider it a celebration of your success." The tea service was beautiful. Delicate china cups, tiered platters of tiny sandwiches and sweets, proper cloth napkins. We talked and laughed as we nibbled cucumber sandwiches and scones with clotted cream. "This is exactly what I needed," I told Sarah as she poured me a second cup of tea. "I've been so focused on work lately. I forgot how nice it is to just relax and enjoy good company." "You work too hard," she said, adding a splash of cream to my cup. "You need to take better care of yourself, sweetie. Success is wonderful, but not if it comes at the cost of your health and happiness." The tea had a slightly different taste than usual, more bitter, with an almost metallic aftertaste. When I mentioned it, Sarah frowned and tasted her own cup. "Mine tastes fine," she said. "Maybe they're using a different blend today. The Brown Palace is usually so consistent with their service." I didn't think much of it at the time. High-end hotels sometimes experimented with different tea blends. I finished my cup and let Sarah pour me another. About 30 minutes later, as we were getting ready to leave, I started feeling dizzy. At first, I thought it was just the caffeine. I'd had more tea than usual. But the dizziness intensified quickly, accompanied by nausea and a strange tingling sensation in my hands. "I don't feel well," I told Sarah, gripping the arm of my chair. Her face immediately filled with concern. "What's wrong? You look pale." "Dizzy," I managed to say, "and nauseous. Really nauseous." Sarah was on her feet instantly, flagging down our server. "My sister-in-law isn't feeling well," she said. "Could we get some water, please? And maybe you could call a taxi?" The next few hours were a blur. Sarah insisted on taking me to the emergency room when my symptoms didn't improve. By the time we got to the hospital, I was vomiting uncontrollably and could barely stand without support. The emergency room doctor ran tests but couldn't find anything definitive. "Could be a reaction to something you ate or drank," she said, "or possibly a sudden onset virus. Your blood pressure is low, and you're showing signs of dehydration." Sarah stayed with me the entire time, holding my hand and calling Michael to let him know what was happening. She was the picture of a concerned sister-in-law, asking the doctors thoughtful questions and making sure I was comfortable. "I feel so guilty," she said as we waited for my discharge papers. "I should have noticed something was wrong with the tea. You mentioned it tasted different." "It's not your fault," I assured her weakly. "These things happen." But the timing was devastating. I was supposed to give a crucial presentation to the Henderson Group the next morning, a mid-campaign check-in that would determine whether they approved the next phase of development. Instead, I spent the night in the emergency room and the next day at home, too weak to even sit up properly. My assistant had to call the client and reschedule the presentation for the following week. When I finally did present the materials, the momentum was gone. The client was understanding but clearly disappointed by the delay. "Everything happens for a reason," Sarah said when she called to check on me later that week. Pause for a moment. How many coincidental illnesses would it take for you to get suspicious? Leave your number in the comments. Maybe this was the universe telling you to slow down a little bit. The third and most serious incident happened in March, just 2 months before that pivotal moment in the emergency room when I finally began to piece everything together. I'd been working on a major pitch for a new client, a luxury hotel chain looking to rebrand their marketing approach. It was exactly the kind of high-profile, creative challenge I thrived on, and I'd been putting in long hours developing a comprehensive strategy. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. The Wednesday before, Michael suggested we have a quiet dinner at home to help me relax and prepare mentally. "You've been stressed about this pitch for weeks," he said. "Let me cook for you. We'll have a nice, quiet evening, and you can get a good night's sleep before the big day." It sounded perfect. Michael was actually a wonderful cook when he put his mind to it, and I loved the idea of a peaceful evening at home. But around noon on Wednesday, Sarah called with a different suggestion. "I know Michael wants to cook for you tonight," she said, "but I was thinking, why don't you both come here instead? I'll make breakfast for dinner. You know, comfort food. Pancakes, bacon, fresh fruit. Something light and soothing that won't sit heavy in your stomach before your big presentation." The idea appealed to me. Breakfast for dinner sounded fun and relaxing, exactly what I needed to calm my pre-presentation nerves. "Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" I asked. "Of course not," Sarah said warmly. "I want to help you succeed tomorrow. Consider it my contribution to your big pitch." Michael seemed slightly disappointed when I told him about the change in plans, but he agreed that Sarah's idea sounded nice. "She's been wanting to see more of us lately," he said. "And you're right. Comfort food might be just what you need." We arrived at Sarah's house around 7 o'clock that evening. She'd gone all out. The dining room table was set with her best dishes, candles were flickering, and the smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. "This is perfect," I said, giving her a hug. "You're so thoughtful." "Anything for my favorite sister-in-law," she replied with a warm smile. The meal was delicious. Sarah had made buttermilk pancakes from scratch, crispy bacon, scrambled eggs with herbs, and fresh strawberries with whipped cream. Everything tasted wonderful and felt comforting in exactly the way I'd hoped. We talked about the presentation over dinner. Sarah asked detailed questions about my strategy and offered encouragement about my chances of landing the account. "You're going to be brilliant tomorrow," she said confidently. "I can just feel it. This is going to be one of those career-defining moments." After dinner, we lingered over coffee in her living room. I felt relaxed and optimistic, ready to give the presentation of my life the next morning. That's when the cramping started. This time, it was worse than the previous incidents. Sharp, intense pain that seemed to radiate from my stomach through my entire torso. Within minutes, I was doubled over, gasping for breath. Oh God, I managed to say something's really wrong. Michael and Sarah were both beside me instantly, their faces masks of concern and alarm. "We're calling an ambulance," Michael said, already reaching for his phone. "No, wait," I protested weakly. "Maybe it's just something I ate." "Give it a few minutes." But the pain only intensified. Soon I was vomiting uncontrollably, and my vision was blurring at the edges. Sarah held a cool washcloth to my forehead while Michael paced frantically. "This isn't normal," he said. "We're going to the hospital now." The ambulance ride was a nightmare of pain and confusion. The paramedics started an IV and monitored my vital signs, but they couldn't determine what was causing my symptoms. At the hospital, the emergency room team ran extensive tests. My blood work showed elevated levels of several markers that suggested poisoning, but they couldn't identify the specific substance. "Has she been taking any new medications?" the doctor asked Michael. "Any dietary supplements or herbal remedies?" "Nothing," Michael replied, holding my hand tightly. "She's always been careful about what she puts in her body." They kept me overnight for observation, running additional tests and monitoring my condition. By morning, the worst of the symptoms had passed, but I was weak and exhausted. The presentation, of course, had to be canceled. The client was understanding, but ultimately chose a different agency. Months of work and preparation down the drain. As I lay in that hospital bed, watching the morning light filter through the windows, something shifted inside me. 3 mysterious illnesses in 4 months, each one perfectly timed to derail important career moments. It seemed like more than coincidence. But I pushed the thought away. These were the people I loved most in the world. The idea that they might deliberately harm me was too terrible to consider. Or so I told myself at the time. It wouldn't be until that final incident 2 months later, the one that brought everything into focus, that I would finally be ready to face the truth that had been staring me in the face all along. The turning point came 3 weeks after that terrible night in March when I'd ended up hospitalized again. I was finally feeling physically strong, but something had fundamentally shifted in my mind. 3 incidents in 4 months, all perfectly timed to sabotage crucial career moments. The rational part of my brain kept insisting it was coincidence, but my intuition was screaming that something was very, very wrong. It started with small things I began to notice. The way Michael's phone would buzz with text messages late at night, and how he'd quickly flip it face down when I glanced over. How Sarah would ask unusually detailed questions about my work schedule during our phone conversations. The way both of them would exchange quick glances when they thought I wasn't looking. But it was my mother who really opened my eyes. Mom called me on a Thursday evening in early April, just to check in. She'd been worried about my health since the March incident, and she had that particular tone in her voice that meant she was about to say something I might not want to hear. "Margaret, sweetheart," she began carefully, "I've been thinking about these illnesses you've been having." "Mom, please," I said, settling into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea. "The doctor said it could be anything. Sometimes these things just happen." "That's just it, honey. They don't just happen. Not like this." I could hear her take a deep breath before continuing. "I've lived 68 years on this earth, and I've learned to trust my instincts about people. Something doesn't feel right about the timing of all this. My mother had always been protective of me, sometimes overly so. After my father died when I was in college, she'd become even more vigilant about potential dangers in my life. I'd learned to take her concerns with a grain of salt." "What are you trying to say, Mom?" "I'm saying that maybe you should start paying closer attention to patterns. When do these episodes happen? Who's around when they occur? What do they have in common?" I was quiet for a long moment, letting her words sink in. "You think someone is deliberately making me sick?" "I think," she said gently, "that you're a smart woman who's been through some very suspicious circumstances. And I think you should trust your instincts, even if they're telling you things you don't want to believe." After we hung up, I couldn't shake her words. I went to my home office and pulled out a notebook, determined to document everything I could remember about each incident. Dates, times, who was present, what I ate or drank, how the symptoms progressed. When I laid it all out on paper, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The 26th of November, Thanksgiving dinner at Sarah's house. Herb-crusted salmon with new seasoning blend. Severe stomach cramping starting approximately 1 hour after eating. Missed 3 days of work. Lost momentum on Henderson campaign preparation. The 15th of January, afternoon tea with Sarah at Brown Palace Hotel. Earl Grey tea that tasted different according to me, though Sarah's cup seemed fine. Sudden onset dizziness and nausea. Emergency room visit, missed crucial Henderson presentation the next day. The 18th of March. Breakfast for dinner at Sarah's house before major hotel chain pitch. Buttermilk, pancakes, bacon, eggs, coffee. Most severe episode yet, requiring overnight hospitalization. Lost the account entirely. The common factors were undeniable. Sarah was present at all 3 incidents. Each episode occurred before a major career milestone. And each time, the symptoms were severe enough to derail my professional plans, but not severe enough to cause permanent damage. I stared at the notes I'd written, my hands trembling slightly. This couldn't be real. Sarah was family. She'd been nothing but supportive and caring during each crisis. And Michael, my husband, the man who'd held my hand through every emergency room visit, surely he couldn't be involved in something so sinister. But once the seed of suspicion was planted, I couldn't ignore the other details that had been nagging at me. Like how Sarah always seemed to know exactly when I had important presentations or meetings, even when I hadn't mentioned them to her directly. How she'd started calling more frequently in recent months, always asking casual questions about my work schedule. How Michael had been spending more time at her house lately, claiming they were planning something special for our upcoming anniversary. I decided I needed to investigate further, but carefully. If I was wrong, and God, I hoped I was wrong, I didn't want to damage my relationships with unfounded accusations. If I was right, I needed evidence that would prove what was happening. The first thing I did was start carrying a small recording device. I know that sounds paranoid, but after 3 unexplained poisonings, a little paranoia seemed justified. I bought a tiny digital recorder online and began keeping it in my purse whenever I was around Sarah and Michael together. The second thing I did was become more observant about their behavior. I started noticing how they interacted when they thought I wasn't paying attention, the way they would stop talking when I entered a room, the meaningful looks they'd exchange over dinner. The way Sarah's questions about my work had become increasingly specific and frequent. But it was what I discovered on Michael's phone that really shattered my world. It happened on a Saturday morning in late April. Michael was in the shower, and his phone was charging on his nightstand. It buzzed with a text message, and I glanced over automatically. The way you do when you've been married for 5 years and checking each other's phones is no big deal. The message was from Sarah, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The Henderson presentation is Thursday, right? Same plan as before? Henderson. That was the name of a potential new client I'd been working with, a luxury car dealership looking to revamp their marketing strategy. I had mentioned the presentation to Michael just once, in passing, 3 days earlier. How did Sarah know about it? And what did she mean by same plan as before? What would you have done at this moment? Confront them immediately or gather evidence? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your survival instincts. My hands were shaking as I picked up his phone and scrolled up through their conversation history. What I found there changed everything. The 16th of March, 2 days before the breakfast for dinner incident. Sarah, hotel pitch is Wednesday, right? Michael, Thursday morning, but we're doing dinner Wednesday night. Sarah, perfect. I'll handle the prep work. Michael, make sure it's not too strong this time. We just need her sick enough to miss the presentation. Sarah, don't worry. I've been practicing the dosages. The 13th of January, 2 days before the tea incident. Sarah, Henderson, follow-up is this week. Michael, Tuesday afternoon. We're doing tea Monday. Sarah, good. The Brown Palace setting will be perfect. More discreet. Michael, just enough to make her sick, right? I don't want permanent damage. Sarah, of course not. We're not monsters, Michael. We just need to level the playing field. The 24th of November. Sarah, she landed Henderson. We need to act fast before she gets too established. Michael, Thanksgiving dinner. Sarah, perfect. Family celebration. No one will suspect anything. I've got something that will keep her down for a few days. Michael, you're sure it's safe? Sarah, trust me, little brother. I know what I'm doing. I dropped the phone as if it had burst into flames. My vision was blurring and I felt like I might vomit. Michael, my husband, the man I'd trusted with my life, had been helping his sister poison me. They'd been deliberately sabotaging my career, making me sick, sending me to the hospital. For months. The shower was still running. I had maybe 2 more minutes before Michael came out and found me reading his messages. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd learned, trying to figure out what to do next. I quickly forwarded the most incriminating messages to my own phone, then deleted the forwarded messages from Michael's sent folder. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the phone, but I managed to get the evidence safely transferred to my device. When Michael emerged from the bathroom, I was sitting in bed reading a book, trying to look normal. But inside, I was falling apart. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, it was all a lie. Morning, beautiful, he said, kissing my forehead as he got dressed. What do you want to do today? I looked up at him. This man I'd loved for 6 years. This man who'd promised to cherish and protect me, and felt like I was seeing a stranger. I thought I might visit my mom this afternoon, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. It's been too long since we had a good visit. That sounds nice, he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. Tell her I said hello. Such ordinary words. Such a normal morning routine. Except nothing would ever be normal again. I waited until Michael left for his Saturday golf game before I broke down completely. I sat on our bedroom floor and sobbed. For the betrayal. For the months of sickness and fear. For the career opportunities I'd lost because the two people I trusted most in the world had been systematically poisoning me. But after I'd cried myself out, something else took over. Anger. Cold. Focused determination. If they thought they could destroy my career and possibly my health without consequences, they were about to learn how wrong they were. I called my mother and asked if I could come over. I needed someone I could trust completely. Someone who would help me figure out what to do next. Of course, sweetheart, she said immediately. Are you all right? You sound upset. I'll explain when I get there, Mom. But you were right. You were right about everything. An hour later, I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table, showing her the text messages on my phone. She read them in silence, her face growing paler with each exchange. Oh, Margaret, she whispered when she finished. Oh, my poor girl. How long has this been going on? At least since November, I said, my voice hollow. Maybe longer. I don't know how many opportunities I've lost because of them. I don't know how close they've come to seriously harming me. My mother was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing the full implications of what we'd discovered. We need to involve the police, she said finally. This is attempted poisoning. This is a serious crime. With what evidence? I asked. Text messages that could be interpreted as something innocent. I need more proof. I need to catch them in the act. Mom shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. I am not letting you put yourself in danger just to gather evidence. We're calling the police right now. But I'd already made up my mind. Mom, listen to me. If we go to the police now with just these messages, they'll deny everything. They'll say it was just siblings joking around, or that the messages were taken out of context. Sarah's smart. She'll have explanations for everything. Then what do you propose to do? I'm going to give them one more opportunity to poison me, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. But this time, I'll be ready for them. The plan I came up with was risky, but it was the only way I could think of to get irrefutable proof of what they were doing. The Henderson presentation was scheduled for Thursday morning, exactly the kind of high-stakes career moment that had triggered their previous attacks. Based on their text messages, they were already planning something. I decided to play along, but with my own preparations in place. First, I bought a small, high-quality video camera that I could hide in my purse. If they were going to try to poison me again, I wanted their confession and their actions recorded. Second, I quietly reached out to a lawyer friend from college, someone who specialized in criminal defense. I didn't give her details, but I asked hypothetical questions about what kind of evidence would be needed to prosecute a poisoning case. Audio or video recordings are ideal, she told me, especially if you can get the perpetrators discussing their plans or admitting to previous incidents. Physical evidence is also crucial, if you can preserve samples of whatever substance they're using. Third, I started carrying a small kit with me everywhere, empty vials that I could use to collect samples of food or drink if necessary, and a chemical testing kit I'd ordered online that could detect common poisons. Most importantly, I prepared an escape plan. If they tried to poison me again, I would pretend to consume whatever they gave me, but I would find a way to avoid actually ingesting it. Then I would wait to see if they revealed information about their scheme while secretly recording everything. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. On Tuesday, 2 days before my Henderson presentation, Sarah called with a familiar suggestion. I know you must be nervous about Thursday, she said in that caring, sisterly tone I now recognized as completely fake. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night? Something light and relaxing. Michael mentioned you've been stressed about this pitch. There it was, the setup. Just like the previous times, she was offering to help me relax before a big presentation. That's so sweet of you, I said, injecting warmth into my voice. I'd love that. What time should we come over? 7 o'clock? I'll make that lemon herb chicken you like, with rice and steamed vegetables. Nothing too heavy. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window and trying to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. Tomorrow night, I would walk into Sarah's house knowing she planned to poison me. I would sit at her table, smile at her face, and pretend everything was normal while secretly documenting evidence of her crimes. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. For months, I'd been a victim, confused, sick, losing opportunities I'd worked so hard for. Tomorrow night, I would take control of the situation. The next morning, I went to work as usual, but found it almost impossible to concentrate. Every time my phone rang, every time someone approached my desk, my heart would race. I felt like I was living in a thriller movie, except this was my real life. Around lunchtime, I got a text from Michael, looking forward to dinner at Sarah's tonight. She's really excited to see you. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about the man who'd sent it. This was the person who'd promised to love and protect me, who'd held me while I cried after each mysterious illness, who'd sat beside my hospital bed looking concerned and caring. And all the while, he'd been part of the plan to harm me. The betrayal was almost harder to process than the poisoning itself. I spent the afternoon finalizing my Henderson presentation, working on the slides and rehearsing my talking points. Ironically, knowing what Sarah and Michael were planning had given me a strange kind of focus. I was determined to deliver the best presentation of my career, if only to spite their efforts to sabotage me. At 6 o'clock, I packed up my things and headed home to meet Michael. The video camera was charged and ready in my purse, along with the sample collection vials and testing kit. I'd practiced operating the camera without looking at it, so I could start recording discreetly when needed. Michael was waiting for me when I got home, already dressed for dinner in khakis and a button-down shirt. "Ready for a relaxing evening?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "Sarah's really gone all out for tonight." "I'm sure she has," I replied. And for the first time in months, I meant it completely. As we drove to Sarah's house through the early evening traffic, I watched Michael's profile and wondered when he'd become a stranger to me. Had there been signs I'd missed? Moments when his mask had slipped? Or had he always been this good at deception? "You're quiet tonight," he observed as we turned onto Sarah's street. "Just thinking about the presentation tomorrow," I said. "I want everything to go perfectly." "It will," he assured me, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You're brilliant, Maggie. This client would be crazy not to choose you." The casual hypocrisy of his words, encouraging me even as he planned to sabotage me, made my stomach turn. But I squeezed his hand back and smiled. "Thanks, honey. That means a lot." Sarah's house looked the same as always, warm light glowing from the windows, her beautiful garden perfectly maintained, everything appearing normal and welcoming. But now I knew what lay beneath the surface. As we walked up to her front door, I silently activated the recording device in my purse. Whatever happened next, I would have evidence of their crimes. Sarah greeted us with her usual warmth, hugging me tightly and complimenting the dress I was wearing. "You look beautiful, sweetie," she said. "That color is perfect on you. Come in, dinner's almost ready." The house smelled wonderful. Lemon and herbs and roasting chicken. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect family evening. "Can I help with anything?" I offered, following her toward the kitchen. "Just relax," she said, waving me away. "Tonight is all about helping you feel calm and confident for tomorrow." "Michael, why don't you open that bottle of wine I picked out? It's a nice Sauvignon Blanc that should pair well with the chicken." As we settled in her living room with glasses of wine, I found myself studying both of them with new eyes. They seemed so normal, so caring. Sarah asked about my presentation strategy, offering encouragement and asking thoughtful questions. Michael talked about a new project at work, making us laugh with stories about his challenging clients. If I hadn't seen those text messages, if I didn't know what they were planning, I would have enjoyed this evening completely. The cognitive dissonance was almost overwhelming. When Sarah announced that dinner was ready, I felt my heart rate spike. This was it, the moment when everything would be decided. Either I would finally get the proof I needed, or I would discover that I'd been wrong about everything. As we moved to the dining room, I said a silent prayer that I was strong enough for whatever was about to happen. The table was beautifully set, as always. Sarah had outdone herself with the meal. The lemon herb chicken looked and smelled delicious, accompanied by wild rice and perfectly steamed asparagus. A pitcher of ice water sat in the center of the table, along with a small vase of fresh flowers. "This looks incredible," I said, taking my usual seat across from Sarah. "You've really outdone yourself." "It's my pleasure," she replied, serving generous portions onto each of our plates. "I want you to be well-fed and well-rested for your big day tomorrow." We began eating, and the conversation continued to flow naturally. The chicken was perfectly seasoned and tender, the rice was fluffy and flavorful, and the asparagus was cooked just right. Everything tasted normal and delicious, but I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Based on their previous patterns, the poisoning would come with a drink, coffee, tea, or some other beverage served separately from the main meal. Sure enough, as we finished our entrees, Sarah stood up to clear the plates. "I made a special dessert for tonight," she announced, "and I thought we could have coffee to go with it. I got some of those fancy beans from that new roastery downtown." There it was, the coffee, just like the text message had suggested. Same plan as before. "That sounds wonderful," I said. My mouth dry despite the wine I'd been sipping. I could definitely use some caffeine to help me stay alert for final prep work tonight. Sarah disappeared into the kitchen, and I could hear her moving around, presumably preparing the coffee and dessert. Michael and I continued chatting, but I noticed he seemed slightly more tense than usual, checking his watch and glancing toward the kitchen. When Sarah returned, she was carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee and what looked like individual chocolate tarts. "These look amazing," I said as she set a cup in front of me. The coffee smelled wonderful, rich and aromatic with no hint of anything unusual. But I'd learned not to trust my senses. As Sarah served the dessert and settled back into her chair with her own coffee, I waited for my opportunity. It came when Sarah excused herself to get cream from the kitchen, and Michael stepped outside to take a phone call from work. I was alone with the 3 coffee cups for less than 2 minutes, but it was enough. Moving quickly, I used one of my sample vials to collect a small amount of liquid from my cup, then carefully switched my cup with Sarah's. If there was something in the coffee, she would be drinking it instead of me. When they both returned, I was sitting calmly, my new cup in front of me, the sample safely stored in my purse. "Sorry about that," Michael said, retaking his seat. "Work emergency. Where were we?" We raised our cups in a toast to my presentation the next day, and I watched carefully as Sarah took her first sip of coffee. If my suspicions were correct, she was about to ingest whatever poison she'd prepared for me. What happened next would either vindicate my paranoia or prove that I'd become dangerously suspicious of the people who loved me most. I took a small sip from my cup, Sarah's original cup, and waited to see which version of reality was true. The coffee tasted perfectly normal, rich, smooth, with just a hint of the chocolate notes Sarah had promised. But as I sat there, watching Sarah take sip after sip from what had originally been my cup, I felt like I was holding my breath underwater, waiting to see if I would surface or drown. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. We continued our conversation about my presentation, about Michael's work projects, about Sarah's latest marketing campaigns. Everything seemed normal, pleasant even. I began to wonder if I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe those text messages had been innocent. Maybe my paranoia had finally gotten the better of me. Then Sarah set down her coffee cup with a slight tremor in her hand. "Is everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Fine," she said quickly. but I noticed a slight flush creeping up her neck. Just a little warm in here. Michael, could you open a window? Michael stood immediately, moving to crack open the window in the dining room. But when he returned to the table, I caught him shooting a quick, concerned glance at Sarah. 5 more minutes passed. Sarah was trying to maintain normal conversation, but I could see beads of perspiration forming on her forehead. Her hands were definitely shaking now, and she kept swallowing hard, as if fighting nausea. Sarah, Michael said, his voice tight with concern. You don't look well. Are you feeling okay? She started to say, then stopped, pressing a hand to her stomach. Actually, I do feel a bit strange, dizzy, and my stomach. I watched this unfold with a mixture of horror and vindication. Part of me wanted to stop this, to tell them what I'd done, to call for help. But the larger part of me, the part that had been systematically poisoned for months, needed to see this through. Maybe you should sit down, I suggested, standing up as if to help her, or we could get you some water. No, Sarah tried to stand up, but her legs were clearly unsteady. She gripped the edge of the table, her face now pale except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. Michael was beside her in an instant, but instead of the immediate concern and competence he'd shown during my episodes, he seemed confused, almost panicked. What did you eat today? He asked urgently. Did you take any medication? Any supplements? Nothing different, Sarah gasped, doubling over as a wave of pain hit her. Just what we all had for dinner. Unless, her eyes suddenly widened, and she looked directly at me. The coffee. Did you drink your coffee, Margaret? Of course, I said, lifting my cup to take another sip. It's delicious. Why? But Sarah wasn't listening to my answer. She was staring at the cup in my hands, then at the one she'd been drinking from, and I could see the horrible realization dawning in her eyes. Oh God, she whispered. Oh God, oh God, oh God. Sarah, what's happening? Michael demanded, but his voice had changed. The confusion was giving way to something else, fear, and beneath that, a growing understanding of what might have gone wrong. Sarah's breathing was becoming labored, and tremors were running through her whole body now. She tried to speak, but only managed a strangled gasp before another wave of pain doubled her over. That's when Michael seemed to fully grasp what was happening. His face went absolutely white, and he looked from Sarah to me to the coffee cups on the table. Which cup did you drink from? He asked me urgently. This one, I said, indicating the cup in my hands. Sarah's original cup. Why? What's wrong? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he rushed to Sarah's side as she collapsed into her chair, her body racked with violent tremors. Call 911, he said, his voice breaking. Call 911 right now. But I was already pulling out my phone, and not just to call for emergency services. I was also making sure the recording app was still running, because I had a feeling Sarah and Michael were about to say things I needed to capture. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice came through clearly. My sister-in-law appears to be having some kind of severe reaction, I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. She's experiencing tremors, nausea, and difficulty breathing. We need an ambulance at 847 Pine Ridge Drive Ive in Cherry Creek. As I spoke to the dispatcher, I could hear Michael talking urgently to Sarah, trying to keep her conscious and responsive. Sarah, stay with me, he was saying. Tell me what you put in the coffee. What did you use this time? I need to know so I can tell the paramedics. Sarah's response was barely audible, but my recording device caught every word. Same as before, she gasped, but stronger. Double dose. Thought she needed to miss. Henderson presentation. The admission hit the air like a bomb exploding. Michael's face crumpled with the realization of what she'd just said. You doubled the dose, he hissed. Sarah, we talked about this. We agreed on small amounts, just enough to make her sick for a day or two. She kept bouncing back too fast. Sarah managed between waves of pain. Henderson contract. She still presented the next week. Had to make sure. This time, I felt the blood drain from my face as the full implications sank in. They hadn't just been making me mildly ill to sabotage my career. Tonight, they'd been planning to poison me with a dose strong enough to cause serious, lasting damage. Ma'am, are you still there? The 911 dispatcher was asking. Yes, I'm here, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. The patient is conscious but in severe distress. She's mentioned something about taking a double dose of an unknown substance. A double dose? Of what substance? I looked directly at Michael as I answered. I'm not sure. She seems to be indicating that she accidentally ingested something she had prepared for someone else. Michael's eyes met mine across Sarah's trembling form, and I saw the exact moment when he realized I knew everything. His face went from white to gray, and his hands began shaking almost as badly as Sarah's. Margaret, he said quietly, what did you do? I switched our coffee cups, I replied simply, while you were taking your phone call and Sarah was getting cream from the kitchen. The silence that followed was broken only by Sarah's labored breathing and the distant sound of sirens growing closer. You knew, Michael said, his voice hollow. It wasn't a question. I found your text messages, I told him. All of them. The ones about Thanksgiving, about the tea at the Brown Palace, about the breakfast dinner in March. I know everything, Michael. Sarah tried to speak, but only managed a choked sound before another spasm of pain hit her. Michael knelt beside her chair, but he kept looking at me with an expression of pure terror. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said desperately. We never meant to seriously hurt you. It was just supposed to slow you down a little, give Sarah a chance to compete on equal footing. Equal footing? I stood up, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You've been poisoning me for months. I've been in the emergency room 4 times. I've lost clients, missed opportunities, spent weeks thinking I was going crazy. But you're fine, Michael said weakly. You always recovered. We made sure the doses were never dangerous. Except tonight, I said, gesturing towards Sarah, who was now barely conscious in her chair. Tonight, you decided a double dose was necessary. What if I hadn't figured it out? What if I'd drunk that coffee? Michael didn't answer, but the horror in his eyes was answer enough. The paramedics arrived with a blast of sirens and flashing lights. As they rushed into Sarah's house with their equipment and urgent questions, I stepped back to let them work, but I kept my phone recording, capturing every word of the medical examination and treatment. What did she ingest? The lead paramedic asked immediately. Michael looked helplessly at Sarah, who was barely responsive now. She didn't tell us exactly what. She mentioned it was a double dose of something she'd prepared for someone else, I offered, and that she'd used similar substances before to make me sick. The paramedic's eyebrows shot up. This was intentional poisoning? Before Michael could respond, Sarah managed to speak, her words slurred but audible. Botanical extract, she whispered, from the lab where I used to work, mixed with pharmaceutical grade sedative, double the usual dose. The paramedic immediately radioed for additional support and began preparing Sarah for transport. As they worked, I heard one of them say quietly to his partner, "We need to treat this as a deliberate overdose, and we need to notify the police." Police. The word hit Michael like a physical blow. He slumped against the wall, his face in his hands. "Sarah," he said desperately, "don't say anything else. We need to call a lawyer." But Sarah was past caring about legal implications. The pain and fear had stripped away all her careful planning and manipulation, leaving only raw truth. "Months," she gasped as the paramedics prepared her for transport. "Been planning this for months, ever since she started taking all the good clients. All the recognition that should have been mine. Ma'am," one of the paramedics said to me, "we understand you may have been the intended victim here, You'll need to come to the hospital for evaluation, and the police will want to speak with you." As they loaded Sarah onto a stretcher, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand," she said, her voice urgent despite her condition. "I built my career for 15 years. 15 years of working twice as hard as everyone else, proving myself over and over. Then you show up and in 3 years you're getting contracts I've been trying to land for decades." "So you decided to poison me," I said quietly. "I decided to level the playing field," she replied, her grip tightening on my arm. "You were making me look incompetent. Clients started requesting you specifically, passing over me for someone with half my experience. It wasn't fair." "And Michael?" I asked, looking at my husband, who was following the stretcher toward the ambulance. "How did you convince him to help you poison his own wife?" Sarah's laugh was bitter and pained. "I didn't have to convince him of anything. He came to me. His little wife was making more money than he was, getting more recognition. His ego couldn't handle it." The words hit me like a slap. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to deny it, to explain that he'd been manipulated or coerced into participating. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Is that true?" I asked him directly. When he finally looked at me, I saw shame and guilt and something else, resentment. "You don't understand the pressure," he said quietly. "Everyone at work knew about your success, your big contracts. They'd ask me how it felt to be married to such a powerhouse. Like I was some kind of accessory to your career. So you decided to destroy it." "We decided to slow it down," he corrected desperately. "Just enough so you'd take a step back, maybe focus more on our marriage, our family plans." Sarah said she knew exactly how much to use, that it would never cause permanent damage. "Except tonight," I said again. "Tonight you were willing to risk killing me to make sure I missed one presentation." "That wasn't my idea," Michael said quickly. "Sarah said you were getting suspicious, that we needed to make this one more convincing." I told her not to increase the dose, but she said, "Stop talking," Sarah managed to say from the stretcher as the paramedics prepared to load her into the ambulance. "Both of you, stop talking." But it was too late. I had everything I needed recorded on my phone. Their confessions, their motivations, their methods. The truth about months of systematic poisoning, about a husband who resented his wife's success, and a sister-in-law whose jealousy had turned murderous. As the ambulance pulled away with Sarah inside, I found myself standing in the driveway with Michael, surrounded by the flashing lights of police cars that had arrived moments after the paramedics. A detective approached us, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "I'm Detective Rodriguez," she said. "I understand we have a possible poisoning case here. Mrs. Patterson, I'm told you may have been the intended victim." "That's correct," I said, pulling out my phone. "And I have recorded evidence of their confession." As I played back the recording for Detective Rodriguez, I watched Michael's face crumble completely. He'd gone from being my loving husband to a stranger to a criminal in the space of a few hours. "Mr. Patterson," the detective said when the recording finished, "I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning. And Mrs. Patterson will need your formal statement as well." As they led Michael away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. "I love you, Maggie," he said, his voice breaking. "Whatever else you think about me, please remember that I love you." I looked at this man I'd shared a life with, this man who'd held me while I suffered from the very poison he'd helped administer, and felt nothing but emptiness. "Love doesn't do this," I told him quietly. "Whatever you think you felt for me, it wasn't love." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and legal procedures. I gave my statement, turned over the recording and the text message screenshots, and provided the sample of coffee I'd collected. As I finally drove home alone at nearly midnight, I realized that my entire life had changed in the course of a single evening. My marriage was over. My sister-in-law was in the hospital, fighting for her life because of a poison she'd intended for me. And tomorrow, I would give the Henderson presentation as a single woman whose husband had been arrested for attempted murder. But as I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been built on lies, I also felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. The mysterious illnesses were finally explained. The pattern of sabotage that had been destroying my career was exposed. And most importantly, I was alive, not just surviving, but finally free to live without fear. I spent the rest of the night preparing for my presentation, not because I had to prove anything to anyone anymore, but because I wanted to reclaim what they tried to take from me: my talent, my ambition, my right to succeed on my own merits. The Henderson presentation was going to be more than just a business pitch. It was going to be my declaration of independence from the people who'd tried to poison my body and my dreams. And I was going to be magnificent. The Henderson presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock Thursday morning. I woke up at 6, having managed maybe 3 hours of restless sleep, and for a moment I forgot everything that had happened. Then reality crashed back. My husband was in jail. My sister-in-law was in the hospital fighting for her life from a poison she'd intended for me. And I was about to give the most important presentation of my career while processing the complete destruction of my personal life. But as I stood in my shower, letting the hot water wash away the exhaustion and emotional numbness, something remarkable happened. Instead of falling apart, I felt myself getting stronger, clearer, more focused than I'd been in months. For the first time since November, I knew exactly what was happening to my body and why. There would be no mysterious illness today, no last-minute rush to the emergency room, no apologetic phone calls to reschedule. Today, I would give the presentation of my life. I chose my outfit carefully. The navy blue dress Sarah had helped me pick out during our shopping trip in January. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd helped me select the perfect dress for a presentation she'd been planning to prevent me from giving. At 8:30, my phone rang. Detective Rodriguez. Mrs. Patterson, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to update you on the situation before your presentation today. Please, I said, settling into my kitchen chair with a cup of coffee. Regular coffee that I'd made myself in my own kitchen. How is Sarah? She's stable. The doctors were able to identify the substances in her system and counteract most of the effects. She'll recover fully, though it was touch and go for a while last night. I felt a complicated mix of relief and anger. Relief because despite everything she'd done to me, I didn't want her to die. Anger because she would live to face the consequences of her actions, which seemed both fitting and insufficient. And Michael, he's been formally charged with conspiracy to commit assault with a deadly weapon, among other charges. He's hired a lawyer and will likely make bail later today, but he won't be allowed to contact you or come near your home or workplace. The detective paused before continuing. Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that your evidence was crucial to this case. The recording you made, the text messages, the coffee sample, it's all rock solid. The prosecutor is confident about getting convictions on multiple felony charges. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long moment, processing what my life had become overnight. Yesterday morning, I'd been Margaret Patterson, married marketing executive with a loving husband and close family relationships. Today, I was Margaret Patterson, attempted murder victim whose husband and sister-in-law were facing serious prison time. But you know what? I was also Margaret Patterson, survivor, and I had a presentation to give. Coleman and Associates felt different when I walked in that morning. Word had already spread about the arrests. Apparently, local news had picked up the story of a marketing executive who'd foiled her own poisoning. My colleagues looked at me with a mixture of awe, sympathy, and uncertainty. Patricia Coleman met me at the elevator. Margaret, she said, her voice gentle but firm, you don't have to do this today. Under the circumstances, I'm sure the Henderson people would understand if we postponed. No, I interrupted, probably more sharply than I intended. I'm giving this presentation today. I've been working toward this moment for months, and I'm not going to let what happened last night take it away from me. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. All right, but I'm sitting in on the meeting, and if at any point you need a break, I won't, I said with a confidence that surprised me. I'm ready for this. The Henderson Group arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, 3 executives from the luxury car dealership chain, all impeccably dressed and clearly accustomed to high-stakes business meetings. I greeted them in our main conference room, which overlooked downtown Denver's skyline. "Thank you for coming," I said, shaking hands with each of them. "I'm excited to share our vision for your brand refresh." James Henderson, the company's CEO, was a distinguished man in his 60s with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "I hope you don't mind me saying that we heard about the situation with your family. If you need to reschedule this meeting." "I appreciate your concern," I replied, "but I'm exactly where I want to be today. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to focus on the work that matters to you." He nodded approvingly. "I like that attitude. Let's see what you've got for us." What I had for them was 18 months of accumulated passion, creativity, and professional expertise, distilled into a presentation that I delivered with the focused intensity of someone who'd fought for the right to be in that room. I walked them through our complete strategy for repositioning Henderson Automotive as the premier luxury car experience in the Rocky Mountain region. New logo design, updated showroom concepts, digital marketing campaigns, customer experience protocols, strategic partnerships with high-end lifestyle brands. Every detail had been carefully crafted to elevate their brand while honoring their 40-year history in Colorado. "The luxury market isn't just about selling cars," I explained, clicking through slides that showcased our proposed customer journey. "It's about creating an experience that makes your clients feel valued, understood, and part of an exclusive community." As I spoke, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Pure, uncomplicated joy in my work. No anxiety about sudden illness. No wondering if I'd make it through the presentation without collapsing. Just me, my expertise, and a room full of people who needed what I had to offer. The Henderson team asked thoughtful questions, engaged deeply with our concepts, and by the end of the hour-long presentation, I could see the excitement in their eyes. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we've been looking for," said Rebecca Henderson, the company's marketing director. "You've clearly done your homework on our brand and our customers. More than that," added James Henderson, "you've shown us possibilities we hadn't even considered. This isn't just a refresh. It's a complete evolution." When they asked about timeline and budget, I was ready with detailed projections and implementation phases. When they wanted to know about our team's capacity for a project of this scope, I assured them that Coleman and Associates had the resources and expertise to deliver exceptional results. "We'd like to move forward," James Henderson said as the meeting concluded. "Can you have a formal proposal to us by next Friday?" "Absolutely," I replied, though internally I was calculating the enormous amount of work that would require. "We'll deliver a comprehensive proposal that outlines every aspect of the campaign." As they gathered their materials to leave, Rebecca Henderson approached me privately. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," she said, "but I wanted to tell you how impressed I am with your professionalism today. Given what we heard about your situation, many people would have fallen apart. The fact that you delivered such a focused, passionate presentation tells me everything I need to know about your character and your commitment to excellence." After they left, I sat in the empty conference room for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. I'd done it, despite everything Michael and Sarah had thrown at me, despite the months of poisoning and sabotage. Despite learning the night before that my entire personal life was a lie, I delivered the presentation of my career and landed what would likely be the biggest account of my professional life. Patricia Coleman appeared in the doorway, beaming. "That was magnificent," she said, taking a seat across from me. "I've been in this business for 35 years, and I've rarely seen a presentation delivered with that level of passion and precision." "Thank you," I said, and for the first time in 24 hours, I felt tears threatening. Not tears of sadness or anger, but tears of accomplishment and relief. "Margaret," Patricia continued, her tone becoming more serious, "I think we need to talk about your future here. That presentation wasn't just good, it was exceptional." The kind of work that separates good executives from great ones. Over the next hour, she outlined a proposal that took my breath away. Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts, with equity in the firm and the authority to build my own team. A position that would make me one of the youngest VPs in the company's history and put me on track for partnership within 3 years. The Henderson account will be your flagship, she explained, but we want you to develop a portfolio of similar high-end clients. You've demonstrated that you can not only land these accounts but deliver results that exceed expectations. As I walked to my car that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. How did the presentation go? I got the account, I typed back, and a promotion. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Come for dinner this weekend and tell me everything. But there was another message waiting, from a number I didn't recognize. This is Michael's lawyer. He would like to speak with you about the charges. Please call me when you're ready to discuss a resolution. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Whatever Michael wanted to say to me, whatever explanations or apologies or justifications he thought might change things, I wasn't ready to hear them. Maybe I never would be. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and the complex process of untangling a marriage built on deception. Michael's lawyer contacted me several more times, each message growing more desperate as it became clear that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Sarah, once she'd recovered enough to speak coherently, tried to negotiate a plea deal by providing details about their methods and timeline. Through the prosecutor, I learned the full scope of their operation. They'd been planning it since October, shortly after I'd landed the Henderson account. Sarah had used her connections from a previous job at a pharmaceutical testing lab to obtain the substances they'd used. Michael had been responsible for gathering intelligence about my work schedule and important presentations. The botanical extract Sarah had mentioned was a concentrated form of a plant compound that, in small doses, caused severe gastrointestinal distress, but typically didn't result in lasting damage. Combined with pharmaceutical-grade sedatives, it created symptoms that mimicked food poisoning or sudden illness. They were careful, the prosecutor explained during one of our meetings. The doses were calculated to incapacitate you for several days without causing permanent harm, except for that final incident, where your sister-in-law decided to double the amount. What would have happened if I'd actually drunk that coffee? I asked. The prosecutor's expression was grim. The concentration would likely have caused liver damage, possibly permanent neurological effects. You could have died. The trials were scheduled for the following spring, but both Michael and Sarah's lawyers were pushing for plea agreements. Michael was facing charges of conspiracy, assault with a deadly weapon, and domestic violence. Sarah had additional charges related to obtaining controlled substances illegally. Through all of this, I focused on my work. The Henderson account was everything I'd hoped it would be: challenging, creative, and incredibly rewarding. I assembled a team of talented designers and strategists, and together we developed campaigns that exceeded even my own expectations. 3 months after that terrible night at Sarah's house, Henderson Automotive launched their new brand identity. The results were immediate and dramatic. Showroom traffic increased by 40%, sales of their high-end models doubled, and they began attracting customers from neighboring states who specifically sought out the Henderson experience. You've transformed our business, James Henderson told me during our quarterly review meeting. This isn't just marketing. You've helped us discover who we really are as a company. But the professional success, satisfying as it was, couldn't entirely fill the emotional void left by the destruction of my marriage and family relationships. Some evenings, I'd come home to my empty house and feel the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just Michael and Sarah, but the version of myself who'd trusted completely, who'd assumed the best of people, who'd never had to question whether the coffee her husband made was safe to drink. That's when I decided to seek professional help, Doctor. Jennifer Walsh was a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, and she helped me understand that what I'd experienced was a form of domestic abuse unlike anything most people could imagine. Poisoning someone repeatedly while pretending to care for them is one of the most insidious forms of betrayal, she explained during one of our sessions. It attacks not just your physical health, but your ability to trust your own perceptions and judgment. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen it sooner, I admitted. Looking back, there were signs. The timing, the patterns. Maybe if I'd been more suspicious. Margaret, doctor. Walsh interrupted gently. The fact that you didn't immediately suspect your husband and sister-in-law of poisoning you isn't a character flaw. It's a sign that you're a normal, healthy person who expects basic human decency from the people closest to you. Through therapy, I began to understand that healing from this experience wasn't just about processing the betrayal and moving on. It was about rebuilding my relationship with trust, learning to distinguish between healthy caution and paralyzing suspicion, between reasonable self-protection and isolation. Your instinct saved your life, Dr. Walsh reminded me. When something felt wrong, you investigated. When you found evidence, you took action. That's not paranoia. That's survival. As winter approached and the legal proceedings moved toward resolution, I found myself thinking less about what I'd lost and more about what I'd gained. Not just the promotion and the success, but something deeper. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could face betrayal by the people I loved most and not just survive but thrive. That my career and my sense of self could withstand attacks that would have destroyed both if I'd been weaker or less determined. Most importantly, I'd learned that justice, while slow and sometimes imperfect, was possible. Michael and Sarah would face consequences for their actions. The truth had been exposed, documented, and would become part of the legal record. And I was free to build a life based on honesty, respect, and the kind of relationships that supported rather than sabotaged the people in them. The healing wasn't complete. It might never be complete, but it was real and ongoing. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in downtown Denver, watching the sun set over the Rocky Mountains and reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. The woman who'd sat in that emergency room 14 months ago, confused and frightened by mysterious illnesses, felt like a stranger to me now. The legal proceedings had finally concluded in February. Michael accepted a plea deal, 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3, in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony against Sarah. His lawyer had tried one last time to arrange a meeting between us before sentencing, but I declined. There was nothing he could say that would change what had happened, and I had no interest in providing him with an opportunity for closure that I wasn't ready to offer. Sarah's case had been more complicated. Her lawyers initially tried to argue that she'd been the victim of Michael's manipulation, that he'd pressured her into helping him control his difficult wife, but the evidence told a different story. The text messages, the recorded confessions, and her own admission that she'd increased the dosage without consulting. Michael painted a clear picture of someone who'd been the primary architect of the poisoning scheme. She received 7 years, with a minimum of 5 to be served before parole consideration. The judge's words during sentencing had been particularly pointed. This case represents a particularly insidious form of domestic abuse, Judge Martinez had said. The defendants engaged in a systematic campaign to undermine the victim's health, career, and psychological well-being while maintaining the facade of loving family relationships. The breach of trust involved here is profound and deeply disturbing. I'd attended both sentencing hearings, not out of any desire for revenge, but because Dr. Walsh had helped me understand that witnessing the formal acknowledgement of what had been done to me was an important part of my healing process. Justice isn't just about punishment, she'd explained. It's about society formally recognizing that what happened to you was wrong, that you didn't deserve it, and that the people who harmed you will face consequences for their actions. She was right. Hearing the judge describe their crimes, seeing them led away in handcuffs, knowing that their actions had been officially documented and condemned, it provided a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. But the real healing had happened in the months that followed, as I slowly rebuilt my life from the ground up. The first major step had been moving out of the house Michael and I had shared. Every room held memories that had been tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. The kitchen where he'd prepared my morning coffee while planning my next poisoning. The bedroom where he'd held me while I recovered from illnesses he'd helped cause. The living room where we'd planned our future together while he was actively working to sabotage my career. My new apartment was everything the old house wasn't. Modern, bright, and completely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light, and the open floor plan made it feel spacious despite being half the size of the house. Most importantly, it held no memories of Michael or Sarah. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every dish in the kitchen had been chosen by me, for me. The professional changes had been equally dramatic. The Henderson account had led to 3 more luxury clients, and my new team had grown from 4 people to 12. Patricia had made good on her promise about partnership track. I was now officially Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts, with a 15% equity stake in Coleman and Associates and a salary that made me one of the highest paid marketing executives in Denver. But more than the money or the titles, I loved the work itself. Building campaigns from the ground up, mentoring younger executives, seeing the direct impact of our strategies on our clients' success. It felt like I was finally operating at the level I'd always known I was capable of reaching. "You've become a different leader since all this happened," Patricia observed during one of our monthly check-ins. "More confident, more decisive. It's like you've stopped second-guessing yourself." She was right, though I hadn't realized it until she pointed it out. For years, I'd been unconsciously holding myself back, deferring to Michael's opinions about my career moves, worrying about whether my success might be threatening to him or Sarah. Now, freed from those concerns, I'd discovered a level of professional confidence I'd never known I possessed. The Henderson Group had been so pleased with our work that they'd recommended us to 2 other luxury automotive brands, and word was spreading throughout the industry about our innovative approaches to high-end marketing. I'd been invited to speak at 3 major conferences, and Automotive Marketing Weekly had featured me on their cover as one of 30 under 35 to watch. But perhaps the most meaningful professional development had been the mentorship program I'd started for young women in marketing. Every month, I met with 6 junior executives from various Denver firms, sharing strategies for career advancement and helping them navigate the particular challenges women face in our industry. The most important thing I'd tell them during our sessions is to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, whether it's a client relationship, a workplace dynamic, or even a personal situation that's affecting your work, don't ignore that feeling. Investigate it. Address it. Protect yourself. These young women would nod seriously, probably assuming I was speaking from general professional experience rather than from having survived a systematic poisoning campaign. I decided early on not to discuss the details of my situation with them. Their challenges were difficult enough without the added burden of my trauma. But the lessons I'd learned about self-protection and trusting my intuition were universally valuable. The personal healing had been more complex and gradual. Dr. Walsh and I continued our weekly sessions throughout the first year after the trials, working through the layers of betrayal, grief, and reconstruction that marked my recovery process. "You're grieving multiple losses," she'd explained early in our work together. "The loss of your marriage, the loss of your family relationships, and perhaps most significantly, the loss of your innocent trust in the people closest to you. All of those losses are real and deserve to be mourned." She was right about the grief. There were days when I missed the version of Michael I'd thought I'd married, the supportive husband who'd celebrated my successes and comforted me through my struggles. It took months for me to fully accept that that person had never really existed, that even his most loving gestures had been performed by someone who was actively working to harm me. The relationship with my extended family had been another casualty of the situation. Michael's parents, while horrified by what their son had done, seemed to blame me for not working harder to save the marriage. His younger brother had sent me a letter suggesting that if I'd been more supportive and less career-focused, Michael might not have felt driven to such extreme measures. I'd shown the letter to Dr. Walsh, who'd helped me understand that these responses were about their own inability to process what Michael had done rather than any actual failing on my part. People sometimes need to believe that victims somehow contributed to their own victimization, she'd explained, because the alternative, accepting that someone they love is capable of profound cruelty, is too threatening to their worldview. My own family, thankfully, had been nothing but supportive. My mother had been my anchor throughout the legal proceedings, attending every hearing and helping me navigate the practical challenges of divorce and rebuilding. My sister had flown in from Seattle twice during the worst periods, simply to sit with me and remind me that I wasn't alone. But perhaps the most unexpected source of support had come from my professional community. Word of what had happened had spread through Denver's marketing circles, and I'd been amazed by the number of colleagues who'd reached out with offers of help, referrals, and simple expressions of solidarity. I had a client try to sabotage me once. One veteran executive had confided during a chance encounter at a coffee shop. Nothing like what you went through, but I understand how it feels to have someone you trust work against you. The fact that you not only survived it, but used it to become even more successful, that's inspiring. These conversations had helped me understand that my experience, while extreme, was part of a broader pattern of professional sabotage that many women faced. Learning that I wasn't alone in having been targeted for my success had somehow made the personal betrayal easier to bear. By the spring following the trials, I'd begun to feel ready for new relationships. Not romantic ones that still felt too overwhelming, but friendships and professional connections that weren't colored by the suspicion and caution I'd carried for so long. I joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning in the foothills west of Denver. There was something profoundly healing about spending time in the mountains, surrounded by people who knew nothing about my history and cared only about sharing the simple pleasure of walking through beautiful landscapes. It was through the hiking group that I met David. He was a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital, 10 years older than me, recently divorced himself after discovering his wife's gambling addiction had bankrupted their savings account. On our third group hike, we found ourselves walking together and talking about the challenges of rebuilding trust after betrayal. The hardest part, he said as we paused to rest beside a mountain stream, is figuring out how to protect yourself without becoming so guarded that you can't connect with anyone. Exactly, I replied, surprised by how perfectly he'd articulated something I'd been struggling to express. How do you stay open to new people while acknowledging that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you most? I'm still working on that, he admitted with a rueful smile. My therapist says it's about learning to trust gradually in small increments rather than the all-or-nothing approach I used in my marriage. We began having coffee after hikes, then occasional dinners, then weekend trips to mountain towns. David was patient with my caution, understanding when I needed space, and transparent about his own healing process in ways that felt refreshing after years of Michael's hidden agendas. I like that we're both damaged goods, he said one evening as we watched the sunset from a restaurant patio in Boulder. It means we don't have unrealistic expectations about love fixing everything. 6 months into our friendship, because that's what it was for a long time, a careful, gradual building of trust and affection, he asked if I'd like to take a weekend trip to Aspen. Nothing dramatic or romantic, just a chance to spend more time together, away from our usual routines. I'll book separate rooms, he said quickly, reading my hesitation. No pressure, no expectations, just good company and beautiful scenery. The weekend was perfect. We hiked, talked, shared meals, and slowly began to explore the possibility of becoming more than friends. When he kissed me goodnight on Saturday evening outside my hotel room, it was gentle and tentative and completely respectful of my boundaries. I don't know what I'm ready for, I told him honestly. Neither do I, he replied, but I'm willing to figure it out slowly if you are. That conversation and the patience it represented marked the beginning of what would become the most honest, respectful relationship I'd ever experienced. David had learned, as I had, that real love meant supporting your partner's success rather than feeling threatened by it. That trust was something to be built gradually and maintained carefully rather than assumed automatically. The difference, I explained to Dr. Walsh during one of our sessions, is that with Michael, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells without understanding why. With David, when I'm uncertain about something, I can just ask him directly and get a straight answer. What do you think accounts for that difference? She asked. David doesn't need me to be smaller than I am for him to feel good about himself, I replied. My success doesn't threaten his ego. If anything, he seems proud of what I've accomplished. Doctor, Walsh smiled. That's what a healthy relationship looks like, Margaret. Someone who celebrates your strengths rather than trying to undermine them. As my second winter alone came to an end, I found myself reflecting on how completely my life had been transformed. The woman who'd sat in that emergency room 2 years earlier, confused and frightened by her mysterious symptoms, had been replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and more capable than I'd ever imagined possible. I was running the most successful department in my company's history. I was in a relationship built on honesty and mutual respect. I was living in a space that reflected my own taste and values. Most importantly, I was free from the fear and confusion that had characterized so much of my marriage. The poisoning, as terrible as it had been, had forced me to examine every aspect of my life and rebuild it according to my own standards rather than trying to accommodate the destructive needs of people who claim to love me. Do you ever regret exposing them? A journalist had asked me during an interview for a magazine article about workplace sabotage. Some people might have chosen to confront them privately rather than involving law enforcement. Never, I'd replied without hesitation. What they did wasn't just wrong. It was criminal. If I'd handled it privately, they would have faced no real consequences, and they might have done the same thing to someone else. Some actions require accountability, not just forgiveness. The article, when it was published, had generated hundreds of responses from women who'd experienced various forms of professional sabotage. Many of them thanked me for speaking publicly about my experience, saying it had helped them recognize and address similar situations in their own lives. Your story gave me permission to trust my instincts, one woman had written. I'd been having mysterious computer problems and missing emails whenever I had important projects due. After reading your article, I decided to investigate. Turns out my supervisor had been accessing my computer remotely and sabotaging my work because she felt threatened by my performance. I never would have thought to look for that kind of deliberate interference if you hadn't shared your experience. These responses had convinced me that speaking publicly about what had happened was the right choice, despite the invasion of privacy it represented. If my story could help other women recognize and address workplace sabotage or domestic abuse, then the discomfort of public attention was a worthwhile trade-off. As I stood on my balcony that evening, watching the lights of Denver twinkle below and the mountains fade into silhouette against the darkening sky, I felt profoundly grateful for the life I'd built from the ashes of the one that had been destroyed. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been days of crushing sadness, nights of insomnia and anxiety, moments when the betrayal felt so overwhelming that I wondered if I'd ever feel safe trusting anyone again. But I'd survived it all. More than survived, I'd used the experience to become more authentic, more successful, and more capable of building healthy relationships than I'd ever been before. The Margaret who'd been slowly poisoned by her husband and sister-in-law was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth, trusted her own instincts, and refused to accept less than she deserved from the people in her life. It had been the most painful transformation I could imagine, but it had also been the most necessary one. Tomorrow, I would give a keynote address to the Rocky Mountain Women's Leadership Conference about the importance of trusting your instincts and protecting your success from those who might try to undermine it. Next month, David and I were planning a trip to Ireland, our first international travel together. This fall, I would launch my own consulting firm, using everything I'd learned about strategic marketing and personal resilience to help other professionals achieve their goals. The future was bright, built on a foundation of hard-won wisdom and authentic relationships. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged, in a life that was completely, unapologetically my own. If my story resonates with you, please share it with other women who might need to hear this. Trust your instincts, they could save your life. And remember, you're stronger than you know.